Hi everyone, and welcome to this event, which is jointly sponsored by the Policy Institute and UK The Changing Europe, both at King's College. For those of you who've come to see Bobby Duffy chairing, I'm not Bobby Duffy, who sends his apologies. The point of this panel is...
Sorry, could you speak up a little bit? We can't hear at the back.
Okay, I'll never usually get that. The point of this panel is twofold. Firstly, to talk about the policy of levelling up, what it means, what it might mean, but also more substantively to talk through some of the details from a new report that we've produced, which is based on a large survey, a national survey carried out by YouGov of what people think about their area, what people think about inequality, what people think levelling up should look like. And the way we're going to structure this, and yes, I am stalling slightly in case Lisa walks in. At some point, is we're going to kick off with Sophie Stowers, who's our newest researcher at UK and the Changing Europe, who's going to present some of the key findings from the report. Then, in theory, Lisa is going to respond. I will play that one a little bit by ear. And finally, if all goes according to plan, Rachel Wearmouth from the New Statesman is going to add her reflections. Then hopefully we can open up for questions and discussion and grass and puppy afterwards. So that is the plan. I've got a feeling you might have to kick off minus Lisa.
Yeah.
If that's all right.
Yeah.
All right, Sophie, over to you.
Hello. So at UK The Changing Europe, what we found was that a lot of our the previous research that had been carried on levelling up quite often focused on the policy options that were available, as opposed to the views and the feelings of voters themselves about what they want for themselves in the local communities. So as Anand said, we've carried out a survey of over 20,000 people across England, the largest survey of its kind so far in levelling up, and that was complemented by some focus groups that were carried out by Suzanne Hall from Kingston's Policy Institute, and together those two data collections form the basis of our new report, which comes out in the middle of October. I'm going to use this clicker and hope it works, so I can show you some of it. So the first thing to probably say is that people like where they live, they're proud of where they come from. So across England, about 3 in 4 people feel at least quite proud of their area, and we see not much variation across the different regions of England in that figure. It's quite interesting because one of the implicit aims of the Levelling Up white paper, which was released I think in February or March, was to bring back that feeling of people feeling proud of the local area and happy to live where they do, but it actually seems that that is already the case. At the individual level, we did see that the biggest factor that affects people's sense of pride in where they're from was actually their age and their level of financial security. So things like a person's age, their savings, their financial independence, their housing status, they are all correlated with their sense of local pride. So it's if people don't feel stable, secure, that they don't have that safety net, that impacts their sense of local pride and how happy they are to live where they do. So in his mini budget on Friday, the Chancellor suggested that we should stop talking about redistribution and distributive policy, saying it was a divisive topic. That might be the case amongst MPs and his backbenchers, but it's just not true for the public as a whole, according to our survey. We actually found that a majority of people in England think that the government should implement some kind of redistributive policy to tackle regional inequality in England. So around 68% of the people in England agree with that idea. And again, we see very little difference when comparing groups by their age, their gender, their education, their social grade, their region. So that suggests that redistributing funding is actually so redistributing funding from more well-off areas to poorer areas is just a broadly popular idea. So as you can see from the figure as well, we also found that if levelling up is framed around geographic inequality, so shifting money from richer areas to poorer ones, as opposed to inequality between people, so from richer people to poorer people, that actually increases support for the idea. There was one interesting exception to this otherwise broad base of support for redistribution. So despite being a key plank of the Tories' 2019 manifesto, measures to tackle regional inequality are actually much more popular with Labour voters. So around 83% of Labour voters agree with the idea of redistribution from to poorer areas from more well-off ones, compared to about 56% of Tory voters. And so I think you can see that finding borne out in how divisive this policy area has been for Tories on the backbenches recently. It's further complicated by the fact that when we asked our respondents whether the north of England specifically gets its fair share of government spending, we saw a real split amongst Tories. So around 90% of 2019 Conservative voters in the north of England which is the dark blue bars just there, feel that the North does not get its fair share of spending, but less than half of Conservative voters in the South, which is the light blue, agree that the North is unfairly treated. And you can actually see from the figure actually that there's quite a good chunk of Tory voters in the South who actually think the North gets more than its fair share of government funding. Labour just doesn't have that same split in its electoral coalition. It's quite united not just around the idea that redistribution is a good policy idea to solve regional inequality, but that the North does not get its fair share of spending. And so you can imagine that that's going to present Liz Truss with a choice to make. So a lot of those 2019 Conservative voters in the north of England are likely voted Tory for the first time, in a large part because of her predecessor's commitment to level up the north. So she either pursues that commitment and risks losing traditional Tory sort of shire voters in the south, or she puts those red wall seats at risk. So when we look at the data, we do definitely see that voters think there is a north-south divide when it comes to the allocation of government funding. So respondents in the north definitely don't think that they get their fair share of government resources. So you can see here, the further that we get away from London, the more people agree with that sentiment. It's particularly concentrated in the northeast, if you can see there. So in our survey, people in the northeast were most likely to say that their area didn't get its fair share of funding. So around 91% of our respondents there agree with that statement. And there is that sense that MPs and parties are too focused on the southeast and in London to the detriment of other bits of England. But something which cropped up quite often, and which I think gets missed a lot in discussions of levelling up, is in intra-regional inequality. So respondents would often compare where they lived in a region to other cities or towns in the same region. So people from St Helens would compare themselves to Liverpool, or people in Derby would compare themselves to Nottingham. So they were actually a lot more of the time more contentious than the comparisons to London, because a lot of people would sort of make an exception for London and think it's a capital city, its needs are different, but they couldn't understand why levelling up just meant their nearest sort of university city getting a load of funding at their expense. We also asked people what they think got better or worse in their local communities over the last decade, and we saw for the most part that people think that their local communities have been in decline over the last 10 years. The only thing that's substantially improved is access to the internet and internet availability. There's a few other sort of slight marginal improvements, but nothing as major as that. Two issues stand out as having worsened in particular. So that's the affordability of public transport, more so than the quality of it, and crime levels, particularly in sort of poorer, more urban places across England. And our respondents did see those sort of decline in public services and access to public services as linked to the social issues that they were experiencing. So a lack of resources or investment in their town would mean less investment, less job opportunities for young people, and then an increase in rates of crime. We did then ask, okay, so what would make your area better? We said they could choose one policy option from this list that they think would most improve where they lived. And even though public transport is a big issue, you can see here it's not the priority area for respondents, and neither actually are issues like jobs, like shops, like high streets, which are themes that come up quite a lot when we're talking about levelling up. Actually, the most popular policy options are reducing crime and increasing access to good quality healthcare. And so I think that comes to a tension between the current levelling up priorities and actually what our findings show. So the things that people think would actually most improve their area are the responsibility of national government, of central government, and then unlikely to really be solved by devolving powers, by having an increased sort of use of localised targeted spending. These are national policy issues that are the responsibility of central government. Unfortunately, people do not trust central government to deliver on those priorities, so people just don't believe that politicians care about their area and will deliver on their promises to level up. The good news for Labour, if you can frame it that way, is that people are more likely to think that Labour cares about their area than the Conservative Party, but as you can see, unfortunately, the numbers aren't really great for both. Labour is comfortably ahead on that measure in the north, where it leads the Tories by about 10%, but in the Midlands and the south of England, it's neck and neck. Deprivation does also shape these attitudes, so areas with higher rates of poverty and deprivation are more likely to think that Labour cares about their area. The more well-off in areas, the more likely they are to think that the same of the Tories. But what we do see from our results is that the more local level of representation is, the greater the feeling is that that political actor cares about their area. It does present us with a difficult situation where people sort of want issues solved, which are the preserve of central government while not really trusting them at the same time to deliver on it. And finally, we did ask, this whole survey was about asking people's opinions about what they want from Lebanon, how they feel about politicians, how they feel about their local area. But we also asked them actually how in the end they want these policies delivered and implemented. There was a few key things, so timing was really important. We found that people prefer outcomes to be delivered quickly, but what was quite interesting is they're sort of willing to give politicians about 5 years to deliver on their policies, which is about, you know, a sitting of Parliament. So it does suggest that if a party is going to stand on a manifesto, they've got one Parliament to deliver on what they commit to when it comes to delivering on. Otherwise, support for policies just tend to sort of drop off. The more money, the better. Not that surprising. The more expensive policy proposals are, the more popular they are with the public. A bit more surprising was how important transparency was to our respondents. So how decisions are made about investment, who's involved with the implementation of proposals, who's consulted on these projects, is really important to support for policy proposals. And as a result of that, we did see that any process that involves government ministers was unpopular. So a need-based allocation of funding is preferred. That's not a great vote of confidence for the current way that level of funds are allocated, where local authorities submit bids to government ministers who then decide where money is allocated. People don't like that, and they actually think it embeds sort of intra-regional inequalities, because they think that some local authorities are better prepared to write and prepare those submissions than others are, and so you're just going to get the richer, more affluent areas still getting access to those funds over the areas that actually might need them more. And finally, the last thing is that community support is really important when it comes to level of policy. So proposals that were put forward for community consultation were much more popular than those without. And our focus groups were also similarly really enthusiastic about sort of mechanisms to involve grassroots community groups in coming up with and implementing these policies. So things like online consultations, town halls, surveys, things like that were incredibly important. So that's a quick run through of our report. It is a big one, so we've got a lot more than that, but hopefully that'll be available in the middle of October.
Thanks, Sophie. The report comes out on
20th of October.
20th
Of October.
20th of October, and we'll be having an online event to launch it. You've got to download it online, but it is big and thick. There's an awful lot in it, as Sophie says, so do try and read it. You ready to?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry about that. It's like the end of the world out there. 12 years of the Tories, this is what happens. That was absolutely brilliant, and the most brilliant thing about it is that, you know, an organisation that's interested in how we rebuild this country and interested in what the people of this country think about it is right up my street. So thank you very much for doing that. I think we've got to be clear about the problem that it is that we're trying to solve. Tories called it levelling up, we call it rebuilding Britain, but whatever you call it, for 19 of the last 20 years, only 2 regions, London and the South East, have had the backing and investment from their own government to consistently make a contribution to the to national growth, that paying in more into the public purse than they take out. Everywhere else, under this Tory government, has been put into a state of managed decline. Now, I first started to understand this as the MP for Wigan when I was elected 12 years ago, and I watched the good jobs that once sustained our town, that sense of pride and purpose and contribution that we made, because within living memory we powered the world and we powered this country and we built this country's wealth and influence. I watched as they were taken from us, and when they were taken, they were replaced with lower paid jobs, insecure jobs, the sort of courier delivery jobs that don't pay enough to raise a family on. And what did that do? It meant that, coupled with the amazing achievement of the last Labour government to open up university education to millions of young people, who first in their family history to go to university, it meant that those young people seized those opportunities and off they went to university, but when they looked back, they found that there was too little to return home to. And so the high street falls apart, and the pubs and the banks and the post offices and the bus networks that are commissioned on the basis of passenger numbers, because with those young people and those good jobs went the spending power that sustained the very fabric of our local economy. And when people revolted, when they said there was a problem, too often they were told, this is what progress looks like. Now that is not a sensible way to run a political strategy, as any politician will tell you, but it's also become a problem for the entire country. And that, I suppose, is the first thing that I wanted to say to you is, Levelling up, regeneration, whatever you want to call it, this has been tried by successive governments over 100 years and it's always failed. The reason it's failed is because it's been seen as a nice to have and an add-on, something that is good for local communities, good for regions. It hasn't been seen as a national crisis. But Kieran, Rachel and I see this as at the root of our national malaise. We are one of the most unequal countries, geographically unequal countries in the world, where for too many people geography is destiny. And many major economists liken this to trying to fly a jet using only one engine. It is extraordinary that we have a government that now again seems to believe that you can power this country using the contribution of only a small handful of people in a small number of sectors in one small corner of the country. Even the winners in this settlement are losing. Look at London, where housing costs now consume around half of people's income. Disposable wages are much higher in London as a whole, but disposable income is lower than in most regions of the United Kingdom. And for young people in particular, and for poorer people, that has become an absolute crisis in London, where you have high housing prices, you have congestion, you have air pollution, you have strain on public services, and people being forced out of their own communities because land has become so expensive. So what are we going to do about it? Well, I think the big difference between Boris Johnson's approach to levelling up and our approach to levelling up is that we don't just see this as about redistribution, small pots of money handed out Hunger Games style for mayors and councils to compete over, the crumbs from the table to deliver on their priorities, not ours. We see this as about the great rebalancing of power and wealth and opportunity across this country. So what does that look like in practice? Well, where we would like to get to is a situation where areas have real financial autonomy, because it's local leaders who drive growth, not national leaders. And I was talking to Andy Haldane the other day, who came in to write the Levelling Up white paper with Michael Gove, and he said to me, you don't need one national growth strategy, you need lots and lots of local and regional growth strategies. Now I know this to be true because Keir and I, when he first appointed me to this job, made our first visit, Grimsby. The reason that we did that is because I didn't want to do what a lot of politicians do. I didn't want us to go around the country pointing at boarded up high streets and food banks and telling everyone how grim it was up north and in other parts of the country. It is profoundly offensive to me when people turn up in Wigan and try to portray us as some kind of left behind wasteland, as was once described by a General Secretary of a trade union who shall remain nameless. But we went to Grimsby, and we went there because under the last Labour government, through the regional development agencies, they saw, because they lived in their community and they were rooted in their community, that when national leaders were busy lamenting the strain on the fishing industry, they said, well, hang on a minute, Grimsby is the windiest place in Europe, bar none. And any of you who've ever been to Grimsby will know this. I once tried to do a photo op in Grimsby and regretted it hugely. And that regional development agency took a punt on Grimsby and on the people of Grimsby, and they put some money into attracting private capital into building a wind industry in Grimsby. And Keir and I went to see this incredible success story. That young people, a young woman called Jess that we met, an apprentice, her uncle, her brother and her all employed in this industry, powering the world from the Grimsby docks. That sense of pride, purpose and contribution restored, money back into people's pockets, and the local economy is growing. That's the importance of the pledge that Rachel Reeves made this morning, because we are going to hand that money to our local leaders, people who see not just the problems in places but the potential, and we're going to harness the assets and the potential and the talent that exists in every part of this country in order to rebuild Britain from the ground up. Now I announced today that we would, I announced a few weeks ago actually, that we would also give more powers, not just to councils but communities as well, over land and assets. We'll make it easier for councils to purchase land at cheaper rates by reforming compulsory purchase orders, so that they have far more flexibility. But we're also interested in how we give real autonomy over finances to those places. That is what is often described as the Holy Grail, where we get to a place where you're not just going begging cap in hand to Whitehall to a junior minister who has no understanding or interest about the place in which you live, but we get to a German-style model where areas have financial power that they can put behind their local growth strategy. So we've been exploring ideas like the idea that Onward have been pushing about devolving 1% of income tax to local areas, so that it's not just these small short-term funding pots, but far more fiscal autonomy. We've backed the idea of tax-raising powers like the hotel bed tax, the tourist levy that Birmingham and Manchester have been clamouring for, that could raise significant amounts to be reinvested in the local economy. We're interested in ideas like the universal basic infrastructure that Diane Coyle, the economist, has proposed, where central government stops trying to do everybody else's job, micromanaging millions of decisions in communities, and actually starts to do its own by providing the basic infrastructure that is needed for areas to thrive and to flourish and to create growth again. And with this has to then go the devolution of power, whether it's over buses or skills, not to some areas, some favoured areas who curry favour with the government, but to all. Because it offends me deeply that young people in Bolton now have the right to get on a bus to the places, the apprenticeships that they need, and to see friends and family, because some government minister decided he liked the cut of Andy Burnham's jib. But yet in Barnsley, those young people don't have those same rights and those same powers. It's offensive and it's wrong, and we are going to set that right. And I guess I would just finally say this, that if I've learned anything in politics over the last 12 years, it was mums who taught me this actually. I've had a lot of mums through my constituency surgery over the last 12 years, especially mums with children with special educational needs. And what I've learned from them is that when you have a stake in the outcome and you have skin in the game, you work harder, you're more creative, you try for longer, and you do more because it matters so much and you can do no other. With no exception, any one of those women who's been through my surgery or sought my help in the last decade, they have, regardless of background, regardless of education, regardless of confidence, they have dug deep and found a way to make these opaque, awful, clunky systems work for their kids because it matters so much. Now that's what I see at work in every community in this country, that quiet patriotism that brings people together to try to build and to try to create for the long term and for everybody. So often those people are thwarted by a system that favours those who come in and extract and destroy and take for short-term gain. And that is what we're going to change. That's why I announced today on the conference floor that as well as powers over land and assets, we're also going to end the racket that the housing market has become, because housing, a decent home, is non-negotiable, and it is not a market, it is fundamentally a human right that belongs to us all, not just some. That's how we see levelling up. It's not about local communities and regions alone, it's about this entire country. And we are in a fight now. With the announcement that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss and Simon Clarke made last week, we are in a fight for the future of this country and for the soul of this country, and we absolutely intend to win it.
Thank you, Lisa. What offends me is you coming to our event and plugging bloody Onward. But anyway, Rachel.
Okay, so my interest in levelling up is I'm a journalist. I'm from the northeast of England, County Durham. I spent a lot of years working up there at the Northern Echo and then the Newcastle Chronicle Journal, and then after that I moved down to London because that was the only place I could get another job and move on with my career. So there was a part of me when all of the votes came in 2019, and I saw a lot of County Durham seats, a lot of other seats in the north fall to the Conservatives. There was a part of me that was actually really quite excited because I thought, oh great, there's actually going to be a lot of competition for votes in those areas now, and those areas will start to think about what they really want because they might be able to get some of it for a change. But since 2019 we've seen an awful lot of promises from Boris Johnson, which and we've also seen that health inequalities have got worse in the north. We've seen life expectancy, the gap has widened there. The attainment gap at schools, the GCSE and A-level results both showed that had also got worse. And the housing crisis is a lot worse. So you have to wonder what happens next. and you felt with Boris Johnson because he made levelling up one of the central planks of his sort of sell to voters, that he was electorally tied to it. But now we're in, you know, what is being called a new era, and one that's taken place without an election of any kind. That now Liz Truss's government is not tied to levelling up in the same way, and one of her government's first actions, of course, has been to hold a budget which gave away a lot of tax cuts to wealthy people, none of which, the overwhelming amount of which benefited the South rather than the areas that voted for a levelling up offer. I think the problem for Labour now, as it thinks ahead, is, and it's a fantastic report, which loads of it I recognise from my family back home in the North East, the things that they would say. But the problem for Labour is a lot of the policies that they kind of want to introduce are going to cost an awful lot of money. And I think that's something that they're going to have to explain to voters in other areas of the country. And also this north-south divide over which voters in which areas think is fair funding. And I also think there's a question of where you devolve power to, sort of which areas, because a lot of what the report mentions is the rivalries are actually within regions. So I was thinking back to a time at reporting in the North East when they used to have regional development agencies, and there was one North East which covered, you know, Newcastle, Gateshead, all the way from Northumberland to Teesside, basically. And so many people in Teesside felt that Newcastle got everything, you know, and they couldn't bear to see pictures of the Angel of the North because it just used to drive them mad. And it's no surprise now, perhaps, that all of Teesside's pretty much a Conservative voting area, and then was a Labour voting area, because a lot of those sort of resentments really started to take hold and was tied to that body. So how will Labour devolve, and what bodies it uses to do what it wants to do is an interesting question as well. I think crime is something that, as a reporter, I see come up all of the time. So I think whatever offer you make on levelling up or rebuilding Britain is perhaps the slogan we might use. I think crime's got to be central to it because it comes up all of the time. And yeah, speed. I think polling, not just that UK and Change in Europe have done, but other places have done as well, that people who are bought into levelling up want it to happen now, or want it to happen quickly. And I think that's also a big challenge. It's like, when are the spades in the ground? When does it happen? How quickly? But I'm very interested to hear exactly what Labour is going to do. Thank you very much.
I think the sad thing is, if you go beyond spades in the ground, you think about skills and stuff like that.
Skills,
It's
totally.
really long term.
Yeah.
But we've covered an awful lot here. I mean, we've covered what people think, we've covered what the problems are, we've covered what Labour might do about them, which gives us a lot to discuss. And we've got about 20 odd minutes left for questions and comments. So, lady here, so we'll work backwards because I'm very bad at this chair.
I'm the CLP chair of Bromsgrove, and we have a massive issue with the bus cuts. They've cut our only bus route from Bromsgrove to Birmingham, which is 14 miles. To give you an idea, I drive to work 30 minutes, and I drive the new, we call it the shabby bus deal, 2 hours, 20 minutes. Now, the people who are suffering, a hospital worker who cooks food for sick children about to became suicidal, a care worker, Linda, before I came here, I mean, the Labour Party's been inundated actually with messages. She said, I don't know how long I can keep going like this. You know? So their life has changed significantly. An RAF veteran can't go to the orthopaedic hospital to get treated. A man in his 40s now, totally depressed, and it's just a bus. At the same time, my hometown, Maidenhead, got the Elizabeth line. So it's a right kick in the teeth, you know. So I think my question to you, Lisa, because these people are saying, is this what we deserve after the pandemic, after, you know, the guy went to war? The question, and I know you can't do everything at once, but buses, where is it on the priority list?
Lisa's good on buses. Should we take 2 or 3?
Yeah, let's take loads.
Yeah. Just go. Sorry, Hermione, you just pick, because it's whoever's closest to you.
He's lost all control.
Yeah. I say lost control, it's not been quite.
Hi, Laura. I'm Councillor Robertson Collins, one of the councillors in Liverpool City Council, so welcome everyone to Liverpool. I hope you're enjoying it. Apologies for the weather. Apparently it's even worse in Grimsby. Fantastic to hear your comments, Lisa, on devolution, on some things around regulation of housing market, absolutely, and on some of the giving more powers to local authorities. The reason for that intra-regional competition, of course, is because of the grotesque underfunding of local authorities and the lack of funding for, metro mayors and things at sub-regional level. So that's the reason for that, local sort of ambivalence towards each other. If everything was funded properly, then there wouldn't be that sort of, antipathy between places. As a local councillor, one of the absolute crises we're facing, and local government is in a crisis, let's not pretend that it's not, we are on the brink in terms of financial management, particularly because of social care. And what we need as local authorities to be assured that if we can hold out long enough for the Labour government, which hopefully 18 months away now, looking more and more likely, thank goodness, that we're going to actually fund social care properly, nationally, so that local authorities can then be focusing on those other things like transport, regeneration, stuff like that. But until we get that proper assurance that social care is going to be properly supported, because at the moment, that is taking up about 45% of local authorities' budgets, and it's becoming more and more because that's statutory. And people can't believe when we say parks, roads and all the rest of it, they're discretionary services. It just sounds ridiculous, but actually they are. And unless we're supported to support those statutory services, we're not going to be able to kind of catch up on the rest of the stuff. So it's great to hear your comments, really encouraging, but we need to be assured as local Labour councillors that we're kind of holding the fort in the meantime, that when you get there you're going to recognise that and come in as quick as you can to support us. Thank you.
That corner, there's a couple of people who've been waiting for us. Well, no.
Which is what always happens with devolution.
My name's Tony Webster. I'm actually from Lisa's constituency in Wigan, but I also work in the North East as well, so I've got a couple of things. I mean, one of the things that I think is quite interesting is the extent to which something like, say, the Preston model is being adopted by the Labour Party, where you've got local anchor institutions and a real drive to localise spending and create a local economy based not just around private organisations but cooperatives as well. And what they've done in Preston is to bring together the university, the politicians and various local interests. Now, it's not a panacea. They struggle to get community involvement in it, but it just seems to me that that's a model that's worth looking at, because it actually sort of addresses a number of questions. It's very much driven from the locality itself. It creates much more of a spirit of entrepreneurialism, but that spirit of entrepreneurialism involves a wide section of the community. And I just wonder the extent to which Labour is taking that on board. Thank you.
Okay, so on the Preston model, I'm a big fan of what Matthew Brown and the team have been doing there, and I've been to see it a couple of times. I mean, they do also have these fairly well-paid jobs in the defence industry just on the outskirts of the town, and I think getting good jobs back into communities that have seen 4 decades of economic decline and money back into people's pockets has got to be a top priority for any government worth its salt, because one of the tragedies of what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng have decided to do by funneling more and more money to wealthier and wealthier people is that money will go straight into offshore savings accounts, whereas if you put money back into the pockets of working people in places like Wigan and Preston, it goes straight back out into the local economy and into the local community. And I think if you listen to them, they've basically done it on purpose because they think that this might be a way of keeping inflation low, but you can't keep inflation low at the expense of the long-term growth and health of the country and the people in it. And so, yeah, I think it's a good model. It's certainly worth looking at. Wigan Council also tried something very similar to this with a buy local scheme some years ago. What's missing, I think, is the power to make real change. So what Preston's done very well and very convincingly, as you said, is the convening power of bringing people together through place. but then those people often lack the powers to be able to then deliver on the vision that they have, and that is what the next Labour government is going to change. Social care keeps me awake at night for a number of reasons, not least because, as you said, councils are at a crisis point. There is no getting away from it. We've stripped those services to the bone, and there's nothing else that you can cut. Getting to the point where councils can't meet their statutory obligations, and that is genuinely frightening for some of the poorest people in our country. The thing that really interests me about social care is not just that I've got, like every family in the country, a vested interest in getting it sorted. My dad has got a social care package. He's very lucky to have one. Amazing social workers, but people leaving the profession in droves, and real problems about wages. But also that it affects some of those places that have been hardest hit by globalisation the most, because the young people have gone. We have an ageing population, and so the costs of social care are loaded onto councils that are already struggling with other problems and the fallout of that as well. What do you do about it? Well, a few years ago, a Labour politician published a pamphlet called The Everyday Economy about how we upskill people in those professions, trusting them and empowering them with more autonomy to be able to do more for the people that they work with, using new forms of technology to be able to deliver more, and in turn increasing the wages in that sector. What does that do? That then puts money into places that have seen it go, because those people are going out and spending again in the local economy, and it means that you start to see economic growth again, and that vicious cycle reversed. That politician was Rachel Reeves. She's never told me she regretted writing it, and it's something that we're exploring at the moment, about how you deal with that. And then just finally, buses. Thank you so much. It's like Lisa Nandy bingo. I love buses so much that it became a bit of a meme, because politicians have obsessed about trains to no great effect, because the train system is in complete chaos at the moment. We've obsessed about trains in Westminster, but most people are on buses or waiting for a bus that doesn't turn up. And it's one of the reasons why I think, I looked at the experience of Andy Burnham and the powers that he has to franchise the bus service in Greater Manchester. It took him several years to use that power, and the reason that it took him several years is because he had to convince the people of Greater Manchester that this was a priority. And he went out to every part of Greater Manchester and talked to people about their priorities, and it turned out it was exactly this. And that is why he's taken the buses back under democratic control, and because he's investing. So there's a levy on our council tax, it's costing us money. But that, to me, is the model of devolution that we need, where a local leader has to go out and be transparent and accountable and responsive to the wishes of local communities. At the moment, we've got this halfway house that doesn't work for anyone. It doesn't work for central government because it's a grant system that local leaders can spend, but then they say we need more, and it's not properly accounted for. It doesn't work for communities who are cut out of the conversation. And it doesn't work for those metro mayors and council leaders either, because many of them don't have the powers, and a lot of them don't have the funding. That's why I said at the beginning that we're going to change the whole system, because I think these are the things that are up for grabs. That story that you just told about what buses mean to people. I had a young person a few years ago who wrote to me about buses, and this is what started me off. She just got into care. She had to move school. She lost her friends, her family, and her home in one fell swoop. And the only relationship she had that sustained her was her nan, and they just cut the bus route and she couldn't get there. And that's what's at stake if we get this right. It's not just about creating lots of growth for the economy. It's about the fabric of people's lives and the things that most matter to us. And that's what any Labour government has to stand up for.
Oh no, I was just going to add on, I think the gentleman here talked about community ownership, and I'm a Newcastle fan, and I certainly wish there was some ownership of the fans would have over the football club. And one of the stats that struck me in the report, which surveyed like 20,000 people, so it's a huge report, was that how long someone had lived in an area had no bearing on how proud or not proud of they were of where they lived, but whether they owned a home did. And I just wonder if talking more about ownership and as you said, having a bit of a stake in the game was an important thing that the Labour Party should be talking about more.
Whoever's got the microphone, he says desperately.
Very good, Justin from the CLP. I'd just like to ask Lisa and the panel, does Labour's equivalent of levelling up policy going to increase the party's chance of winning back seats in the Red and the North East? And because it's about the outcomes, I think, not just the investment, and what difference does it make? A slightly related question, levelling up to me has always been like a slogan, like Apex have done, and I just wonder what the panel thought of slogans and short phrases that can increase our appeal. I remember back to the time when Barack Obama was elected and he came up with phrases with yes we can and hope and change. That was important because it always depends on the country's situation and the time and circumstances.
Mine?
The question about the slogan is a question that I was going to ask as well, because we can use levelling up, but actually I'm a journalist and writer by the way, so I interview a lot of people. And the slogan levelling up is thought to be fairly meaningless, and I'm kind of disappointed that the Labour Party, not you Lisa, that sound of it, have taken the slogan up, but it's associated actually with the Tory favour. The other comment I want to make is very quickly, because leaving aside what Lisa said about the importance of social infrastructure, and that obviously comes first, because if you don't have the local infrastructure, you can't do very much else. But I spent a lot of my working life in North America, other parts of the world actually. And one of the things I noticed about the United States, which is very interesting, is that their communities have immense creativity in developing projects and drawing in investment. And I think it's something that perhaps, if you haven't already looked at it, it might be worth going to look. Because I've worked with a lot of American communities in the United States, which is normally not considered the model in this country. But at the local level, it's very interesting the way they both compete with each other and draw in investment. And they do it very cleverly with lots of very fresh ideas, which we might actually learn from.
Thank you. So you've all touched on the potential benefits of devolution powers. I'm from a place that doesn't have a combined authority mayor yet. Are these devolution deals a silver bullet?
Is that, yeah, yeah, no, I can take some more of that, don't mind.
No, let's do that and then we'll go.
Just
one from this side, maybe.
Rachel want to go first, because I'm monopolising.
Yeah, I just wanted to
That's what we
mention.
expected.
I just want to mention slogans. I think levelling up it takes in so many different strands. So it goes to health inequalities. It goes to, how good or bad your park looks. It kind of takes in so many things when you're talking about regional inequalities that I think it is quite useful to continue using it, because it has had so much buy-in from voters, and I get the party politics of it and make it a little bit difficult, but I think you probably need to, if I were part of the Labour Party, I would try to blend it eventually into their new slogan rather than try to bin the old levelling up slogan off, because there is such a political consensus around the idea of levelling up now, and I think that's a useful thing for the Labour Party. Yeah, I think quite a few people at this point have made the point around devolution deals and the kind of like piecemeal devolution we have all across the country, and I think that could eventually feed into the points we were making earlier about that when it comes to resentments that people feel locally, it's not about, oh, that there London, I hate that there London, it's somebody from, Wigan saying, I'm a bit sick of Manchester getting everything. So yeah, I think one model of devolution across the country would be a thing that, again, Labour should be talking about more.
So just about the point on the North East, I won't make electoral predictions, I won't do the restaurant Curtis impression, but I think that is hugely important to voters in that region. I think it is really important that regardless of the slogan that's used, Labour makes a point. I think the interesting thing that we found looking at the North East in particular is that, it's not just that a lot of people think that their region is underfunded there. It's also the fact that there's quite low rates of trust in politicians at all levels, so local level and central government, but particularly central government. And not many people also think that people in government care about the area.
So I do think it's really important, not just to sort of, because it will win votes, but it's actually key to sort of restoring trust in a lot of those communities in politicians and the ability of government to do things. And you know, that's not just good for political parties winning an election, but it's actually quite good for our democracy as a whole.
Can I just say on levelling up, that it was utter political genius. I mean, we might not like the government that introduced it, but it's a phrase, everyone knows what it means, but no one knows how to measure it. And as political phrases go, I mean, that's just where you want to be, isn't it? Everyone knows what you're talking about, and no one knows whether you succeeded or not. I mean, they were good at it.
I mean, I agree with you about the genius of it as an election slogan.
Yeah.
You know, they say campaigning poetry, governing prose.
Yeah.
The problem is it was never translated into prose, and that's our job. We've got to make that work. And I think people do know, actually, just to sort of slightly push back against that, because you're right in terms of sort of if you don't have any proper metrics and you never really define what you're talking about, then nobody can categorically say you haven't done it.
Yeah.
But actually, the people can say that you haven't done it, and people, you know, Rachel's home community and mine know exactly what the government's done and haven't done, and they haven't seen any evidence of this at all. In fact, it's getting a lot worse. I mean, I don't really like the phrase levelling up, and that's largely because my job title is ridiculous. I'd like something that can fit on the ticker at the bottom of the screen when you go on TV. So if anyone's got any better ideas, please, I'll let them know. But I agree with the point about outcomes. I think this is really important for us as a party. We talk about devolution as if handing over the powers is what we're about and is the answer. Now, I believe in devolution because I believe it's the right thing. I believe that these are powers that we rightfully own and they need to be restored to us from people who've held them in too tight a grip for a very long time. But I went back and looked at the way that the last Labour government talked about devolution, that great programme of devolution to Scotland and to Wales that the last Labour government oversaw. And they never talked about it in terms of the powers and the mechanics. They talked about it in terms of what it would deliver for people. Tony Blair said in the run-up to the 97 election that they would be handing power back to the people of Scotland to drive their own destiny, and through the power of Scotland's example, they would show the rest of the United Kingdom what Britain could be. I think we've got to talk about it very much in that way. And do I think that these deals are a silver bullet? I don't actually. I think they're pretty offensive. You've got this situation where the Chancellor sits in Whitehall, he draws lines on a map, he labels some places functional economic areas, which presumably means that other places are not. He creates chances for some places and choices in those places and not for others, and then tells communities they should be grateful and they should accept it. In any democracy worth its salt, we have the right to choose our own governance arrangements. And so I sort of slightly disagree a little bit with Rachel's point about, I agree with the uniformity point, as in these powers should be available in all areas, not just some. But our political arrangements, our governance arrangements, surely have to reflect our own local sense of identity. They have to reflect economic geography. And that's why we've said we'll do something that actually some bright spark called Boris Johnson first came up with and never did, all those years ago when he promised to level up. And that is to say to places, come to us with your governance arrangements, tell us what powers you need, and we will repatriate and restore them back to communities. It seems to me that's a far more respectful relationship between central government and the people that it seeks to represent.
There's a gentleman there, there's a gentleman there, and you've got to go.
Thank you.
Sorry.
David Williams, I'm Valley Labour Party, between Derby and Nottingham. I'm so pleased the lady from Bromsgrove mentioned right at the beginning the problem about traffic congestion and bus services, because that's precisely what we've got in the East Midlands as well. But although I stress I am still in favour of sending most passenger and freight traffic by rail and public transport wherever possible, there are situations where some communities are bogged down with traffic congestion, and I represent a small town in Derbyshire called Ripley, and we get battered by traffic coming off at junction 26 of the M1 as it heads towards the A38, towards Derby and towards the Peak District and Derbyshire Dales. Back in 97, John Prescott, I seem to remember, asked Labour MPs in the new intake in 97 whether they would come forward with schemes to relieve particular road traffic jams and congestion. And like Prescott then, I'm not advocating a mass road building programme, but I am saying, is there any scope for what we hope will be Labour-held seats eventually to come forward where there is local problems, to alleviate these local problems with a bypass now and again?
Gentleman in the corner has had his hand up. Sorry.
Probably can see without thank you. So I'm a district councillor. So what are we? District councillor for North Herts Council. I'm also the deputy executive for Housing and Environmental Health. One of the big things that's obviously an issue, and I think it's an issue across the country, is housing for homeless people, housing for people who need homes who are on the list, and it has to be affordable housing, obviously. Something that I have sort of experienced, I found out more and more as I've taken on this portfolio, is that obviously people who move to an area who aren't from that area cannot access the services for what is quite a long time. So are we looking at, or can we look at, ways in which we have this joint up sort of policy? So if someone moves from an area to another area, they are able to access services, and they are able to join the community there without having this hugely traumatic, especially people who are running away from domestic situations, running away from traumatic situations. How can we solve that?
That level is quite hard.
Fix it now.
Okay, so on this point about some of sort of like reflecting the reality of people's lives, isn't it? A place matters, absolutely matters, and you can get amazing convening power around places, and you know the multiplier effect from having lots of things in a place. But I agree with you that there's a problem when people move, they have to move, and that those very place-based services can become very inaccessible to people. One of the things that we announced today was about this charter that we'll legislate for in government for private renters to tilt the balance of power back to private renters. And part of that is about portability of your deposit, because any of you who've ever tried to rent in London or in Manchester or in Liverpool will know that it is an absolute nightmare. You have to stump up a hell of a lot of money, and then you've got to go and find a new place to rent. Then you've got to fight your old landlord or letting agency to try and get that money back. And in the meantime, you've got to stump up a load of money to the next one. And all the while, this money is sitting in somebody's bank account making money, but it's not yours. And we're going to change that. We're going to sort that out. And you call it portability because it just basically means that the deposit will transfer between landlords, you know, with the bit back if it's more, or you know, a bit more from you if it's less. But also that interest that it accrues will belong to you and not to them. I think that's really important because it's just fundamentally indecent and unfair, but it also is one of the reasons why so many private renters are trapped in really poor quality accommodation and can't do anything about it. And just on this point about roads, there's a big list of roads actually which the government is planning to build all over. They're coming with their hard hats and they're concreting us all again. Which is what George Osborne used to do, and periodically a Tory politician turns up and starts concreting over the north and tells us that we should all be grateful. I agree with you that there is a problem with the state of the roads in many parts of the country. In parts of Cumbria, for example, it's a massive, massive problem, and it affects people's ability to get to work, to school, to hospitals, to the job centre, all those things that really matter. And I don't have a sort of inbuilt hostility to repairing the fabric of our roads. The point, though, for me and for Louise Haig, is that we've also got to provide people with choices. It's no use saying to people in Cumbria, get out your cars, if the alternative is that they're walking 20 miles to work. So we've got to provide those options so that people can choose public transport. By the way, buses, of course, also travel on roads, so it does help to fuel, to support the green agenda. And provide those options and those choices for people. And at the moment, in many parts of the country, we just have absolutely none. Thanks for that.
You need to go, don't you?
I do, yeah,
Well,
sorry.
what the lighting tells us is we're about to start the karaoke part of
You're lucky then.
So let me thank Sophie, Rachel and Lisa for what was, I think, a fascinating session. We've got all sorts of booze and drinks in the back. So if you want to join us for a drink now, you're very, very welcome. Thanks ever so much.